Episode 4 of Planet Earth is about caves. So this habitat is not a habitat that we usually explore in these kind of programmes. To be honest, this is the only series I can think of which actually deals with caves, let alone spends a whole episode on them. And I think that's a bit of a shame, to be honest, because this episode was really good. So let's just dive in. Speaking of diving in, we open this episode watching people dive into caves. And it really sets the scene. We don't get a big intro, we don't spend a lot of time describing the challenges and the trials and all the ways animals adapt to these environments. We just go, these are caves, and then we're going to go in with the episode. I think that's a really good way of doing it. I think we don't need a whole backstory talking about all the different animals that live in caves, because to be honest with you, up to this point, not very many people knew much about the animals that lived in caves, so I think there was no beating around the bush, it was just straight in with what the episode was about. And the first main bit of footage with regards to wildlife is glowworms. We see glowworms in the caves of New Zealand. So they're ultimately larvae for fungus gnats that live in the caves, and they secrete these long mucus strings which catch prey, and they have their glowing light at the end of their tail, which attracts prey obviously. It's quite a good opening to the episode, because I think out of all the animals that feature in this episode, glowworms are probably one of the more well known. Like, I think all of us know about glowworms. I don't think many people know much about them, let alone that they were obviously carnivorous. It gives you a name you recognise and tells you basically everything about them that you didn't even suspect. It was a really good early sequence for this episode. I think it eases you in to what the episode's going to be like. Then we spend a lot of time talking about the formation of caves. So we actually dedicate quite a lot of this episode to geography. I'll be honest, if you're a wildlife enthusiast, this episode might not necessarily be for you. Something to note about this episode is that this episode features more humans than any other episode. So something that I think helps make Planet Earth as timeless as it is that humans do not feature very much. In later series, pretty much most series after this, we dealt with the human impact on the world. This series doesn't touch it at all. This series is basically the natural world as it should be, as we imagine it is, without our interference. In a way, it's a very honest portrayal of the natural world, but it maybe isn't the most honest portrayal of the world in which nature lives, if that makes any sense. I think that's something that I think, having rewatched it a couple of times, that I notice more every time I watch this series again, is that there really is no impact on humans. We don't talk about the environmental impacts, which I think later series, you know, it's some would argue it's been done to death in later series, but it is essential to be there. It is important that it's in these programmes, because while Planet Earth is great, and while it portrays all this, you know, these amazing footage of different animals, it does sort of paint a picture that it's all sort of fine, and that isn't actually the case. We do spend quite a bit of time in the largest cave system in the world, which is Deer Cave, where we basically spend a lot of time with the bats. Not necessarily with the bats, but in the sort of world that the bats create. The bats all roost in this cave, and they leave their, obviously, they defecate, and their droppings land on the ground. So they create this massive mound of guano, all this massive mound of bat droppings, and that is a habitat in itself for various species. You've got cockroaches, you've got centipedes, you've got quite a lot of stuff living there. It's this pretty much toxic, pretty inhospitable world. I mean, the ammonia that's probably coming off that stuff ain't nice. You see a lot of bats that land on the floor, just get eaten by the cockroaches. It's a pretty horrific place to be, and of course that's where the diary sequence is filmed, which I'll get to later. Yeah, it's a really interesting world. I mean, again, I didn't know about that, but again, I feel like a lot of the times, certainly from the first few episodes, having rewatched it, that they show you things that we've seen before, but in a much greater detail. Those sequences that deal with things that have been filmed before are just better in the series, and a lot of them have never been topped since. Outside of the bats, we talk a bit about swiftlets, but obviously we do talk about the people that collect their nests for bird's nest soup. I also find it interesting the way he describes it, how it's like a sustainable harvest. I feel like in reality it probably isn't. If this series had come out later, we wouldn't describe it as being sustainable, but still interesting. After that, we dive into probably the highlight of the episode, which is the exploring the underwater caves in Mexico. So underwater caves are just interesting. They look cool. This sequence was just mesmerising. It looked really good. A lot of humans in this part. You see a lot of people diving, you know, swimming through the caves. It's not about the wildlife, but it's just fascinating. It just lends itself to great filmmaking, I think, these environments. We talk about how the Mayans basically relied on these cave systems, because there was a lot of water in them, and there was no rivers, streams, lakes. These were their only source of water, which is really interesting. The part where the guy's trying to squeeze through the little crevice, it was horrific. As someone who, a little bit claustrophobic, that was absolutely nightmarish to me. I thought that's like my worst nightmare, drowning in a cave that you're stuck in. I just don't fancy that at all. But no, that stuff was really cool, really good. They talked about how dangerous it is, and I think they did a very good job of showing it. I almost felt like when they were describing how dangerous it was, I was like, why are we sending this camera team in there then? But no, really good stuff. I think there's a lot of things I really liked in this episode. I think that might be the best bit, possibly. Probably the best wildlife part of the episode is the bats getting caught by the snakes. That's really cool. Again, it's various types of snakes. There's a couple of pythons, there's some kind of smaller culibrids, and they're all just catching the bats, just hanging off the rocks, just grabbing them in thin air. We talk about troglobites, which is basically a collective term for species that evolve in caves and have just never left them. A lot of them are endemic to only one cave system, and I like how we bounce between a few of them. We've got this Belizean crab, there's the Texan salamanders, there's these angelfish, and it might have been Borneo, I can't remember where they were, but they're all just, we bounce between them, and they're kind of doing their own little weird thing. Like, they've not got any eyes, they've all got weird sensory systems. The salamanders have got like these obviously gills. It's quite interesting again how they've not got any pigment. They kind of show you how all these very different animals, you've got fish, you've got crabs, you've got salamanders, they all basically are doing the same thing, or they're living in the same way, because there's only so many ways you can live in a cave basically, and they're all doing it in their own way, and it's pretty cool. Again, I thought that was interesting. We spent some time in the cave of Vialoth, I think that's what it's called, where there's loads of sulfuric acid. That was pretty crazy. Again, talking about how dangerous these caves are. The guys going in there with their respirators are like, it's mental. In fact, there's fish there. There's fish in this acidic water. Like, what? I think even rewatching it, I was like, I don't remember that. I also don't remember the extremophile bacteria, which is hanging off the cave ceilings. Snotites they're called, and even then they're home for like midges and everything. Even though they're like dripping sulfuric acid, and it's enough to burn a human. Like, crazy, man. Honestly, mental stuff. Not as mental as the biggest cave system in the world, which is Lechugiwa, which is this crazy cave system which the government won't actually let them film anymore after this. This was the last time they filmed it, supposedly. But no, this place was cool. I had all these crystals forming in the walls. Again, another one that just lended itself to great cinematography. The cinematography in this series is phenomenal. The HD might have aged a little bit, but it still looks great. I honestly love it. It's here is well, great stuff. Again, we're not filming wildlife for the most part in this episode. We're just filming all these amazing cave formations, and I don't have a problem with that at all. I think it's all great. And then we focus on the diaries. It's basically the people filming in the bat cave and deer cave with all the bat droppings, and just how miserable it was. I mean, it looked pretty miserable before they showed you people filming there. I only imagine spending a month there was pretty hellish. And then we see the people in Lechugiwa, and that's quite cool as well. Just seeing them. As I said already, it's the last time they were ever going to film there. The note it ends on, where it talks about how the government's basically said no one else can film here. It kind of seems a bit hopeful. I think it's a change from hearing about people exploiting the world's natural reserves. I think it's probably one of the few times I think where people went, "No, we're going to save that." I think, rather than, right, let's make some cash off this, which usually means mining it, which is what I thought was actually going to happen. I thought, watching this, I thought someone's going to mine that, or has tried to mine this. But no, it's nice to know that's not what happened. So yeah, this episode, very good, very good. I said it was underrated. I think it's really good. Is it the best one? I don't. Mountains is maybe better. I think after that though, it may be my favourite so far. No, really good stuff. Highlights, I mean, probably the underwater cave system, but every time they were exploring the caves, I thought it was amazing. I mean, the bats getting caught by the snakes was cool, but I think the standout of this episode is just the caves themselves. I think, yeah, great stuff. Overall, very good. Definitely worth watching. Don't skip this one. I feel this is one that people would maybe skip. Don't skip this episode. It's worth your time. But yeah, next one is deserts. So a bit more wildlife. Not much more wildlife, because deserts are probably the most barren habitat in the world. But there's stuff there. So yeah, I'll be doing that next week. So yeah, as ever, feel free to like, comment and or subscribe if you want to. And as ever, don't feel like you need to. So it's fine, I will survive. So yeah, Deserts next week. Look forward to seeing you then. A goodbye.